My brother humiliated me in the boardroom, laughing that I was too quiet to ever lead. He didn't know Dad was watching everything. The next morning, Dad handed me the keys to the empire, and my first order of business was firing my brother. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. I was shaking. Not visibly, I had trained myself out of that years ago, but deep in my gut, there was a tremor that made me feel like I was going to be sick. It wasn't the flu, and it wasn't something I had eaten. It was the sheer, suffocating toxicity of the air in the conference room. I sat at the far end of the mahogany table, my hands clasped tightly over a stack of dossiers I had spent 3 weeks compiling. These weren't just reports, they were the survival strategy for the company's next fiscal year. I had mapped out supply chain diversions to save us 12% on overhead, negotiated preliminary contracts with vendors in 3 different time zones, and streamlined our internal communication protocols. I was ready to present. I was ready to show that despite the plummeting morale in the sales department, operations were solid. All right, let's settle down. Thomas's voice boomed across the room. My brother didn't sit in chairs, he lounged in them. He was 35, 3 years older than me, and he wore suits that cost more than my car. He sat at the head of the table, Dad's seat, because Frank, our father and CEO, was out on a medical leave that had turned into a semi-retirement dry run. Thomas spun a pen between his fingers, looking at the assembled department heads with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. So, big quarter coming up. I've been telling the boys in sales that we need to hunt. We need to be aggressive. None of this passive nonsense. He let the pen drop onto the table with a clatter. His eyes slid toward me. Claire, he said, his tone dropping into that patronizing register he reserved specifically for me. I see you brought a book report. A few of the junior sales reps snickered. Stephanie, Thomas's wife who had been working as the head of brand aesthetics, a title Thomas had invented for her, leaned over and whispered something in his ear. They both laughed. I have the Q3 operational strategy, Thomas, I said, my voice steady but soft. It addresses the logistics bottleneck we hit last month. The bottleneck, Thomas repeated, waving a hand dismissively. The bottleneck happened because people aren't working hard enough. It's an attitude problem, Claire, not a math problem. It's actually a capacity problem, I insisted, opening my folder. If you look at the data. Data, Thomas groaned, throwing his head back. God, you are boring, you know that. You suck the energy right out of the room. The silence that followed was heavy. The HR director looked down at her notepad. The CFO cleared his throat awkwardly. I'm trying to ensure we can fulfill the orders you're promising, I said, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. Thomas leaned forward, planting his elbows on the table. The smile vanished. Look, Claire, you're good at the little things. Paperwork, filing, keeping the lights on. But let's be real, you're way too quiet to ever lead anything. You don't have the killer instinct. You don't have the presence. He gestured around the room. People follow noise, Claire. They follow strength. You're lucky I even keep you employed. If you weren't my sister, you'd be an assistant somewhere filing invoices. He paused for effect, letting the insult sink into the wood paneling. Now, he clapped his hands together, dismissing me entirely. Let's talk about the company retreat. Stephanie has some great ideas for a resort in Cabo. I didn't respond. I simply closed my folder. The humiliation was a cold stone in my stomach, weighing me down. I looked at Thomas, at his arrogant tilt of the chin, at Stephanie checking her nails, and I realized something profound. He didn't just doubt me, he despised me. He despised that I was the one who actually knew how the engine ran while he just liked honking the horn. I sat through the rest of the meeting in silence, just as he said I would. I was the quiet sister, the invisible worker bee. But as I watched him preen and boast, taking credit for numbers he didn't understand, the stone in my stomach began to crack. It wasn't fear anymore. It was clarity. The betrayal wasn't that he insulted me. The betrayal was that he truly believed I was nothing without him. The migraines started before I even reached my car. I walked out of the office building, a glass and steel structure that my grandfather had broken ground on 40 years ago, feeling like a ghost haunting my own life. The parking lot was gray and rain-slicked, matching my internal weather. I sat in the driver's seat of my modest sedan, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Thomas. "Don't take it personally, just trying to toughen you up. You need to learn how to play with the big dogs. Also, need you to finish the budget for the retreat by Friday. Make it work." I threw the phone onto the passenger seat. Toughen me up. As if managing the entire logistical framework of a mid-sized logistics firm while he played golf wasn't tough. I drove home on autopilot. My apartment was quiet, organized, and empty. I usually liked the silence. It was my refuge from the chaos of the office. But tonight, the silence felt accusatory. "You're way too quiet to ever lead anything." Was he right? Was my competence invisible because I didn't shout about it? I poured myself a glass of water and sat at my kitchen island, opening my laptop. I wasn't going to do the retreat budget. I was going to update my resume. If this was the future of the company, Thomas at the helm, Stephanie burning cash on brand aesthetics, and me playing the maid, I had to leave. For my own sanity, I had to walk away from the legacy I had helped build. Then my phone rang. The caller ID made me pause. Dad. Frank didn't call often in the evenings. Since his health scare a few months ago, a minor heart attack that had scared us all straight, he had been strictly adhering to a no business after 5 p.m. rule. "Hello," I answered, trying to keep the wobble out of my voice. "Claire," his voice was gravelly, worn down by years of shouting over machinery and negotiating deals, but it was sharp tonight. "Where are you?" "I'm at home, Dad, just unwinding." "Good, don't go anywhere. I need you at the office at 8:00 a.m. sharp tomorrow. Not 8:05, 8:00. "I'm always there by 7:30, Dad," I reminded him gently. "I know," he said. There was a pause, a heavy silence that felt different than the one in the boardroom. "I heard about the meeting today." My stomach flipped. "Who told you? Did Thomas?" "I have eyes and ears everywhere, Claire. You know that. I built that place. I know which floorboards squeak and which employees actually work." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. It was just a bad day. Thomas is stressed. "Thomas is Thomas," Frank said enigmatically. "He thinks leadership is a costume you wear." "He's the face of the company, Dad. Clients love him." "Clients love a free lunch and a loud laugh," Frank corrected. "But they stay for the results. They stay because the product arrives on time." He sighed, a sound of deep fatigue. "I'm tired, Claire. I'm very tired." "I know, Dad. You should rest. That's why Thomas is taking over the meetings." "We'll see," he muttered. "Just be there tomorrow, main conference room. I've called an emergency board meeting." "Is everything okay? Is it your heart?" Panic flared in my chest. "My heart is fine. It's my legacy I'm worried about." He hung up before I could ask anything else. I stared at the phone. An emergency board meeting. That usually meant bad news. Mergers, bankruptcies, or lawsuits. Had Thomas done something illegal? Had Stephanie overspent so much that we were in the red? I didn't sleep that night. I tossed and turned, replaying Thomas's insults, imagining him firing me in front of the board the next morning. "You're lucky I even keep you employed." But as the sun began to rise, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange, I remembered Dad's voice. "I know which floorboards squeak." Thomas had spent so much time shouting that he forgot the most dangerous thing in the world wasn't the man screaming at the gates. It was the quiet observer taking notes inside the walls. He had forgotten one crucial thing. I wasn't just the quiet sister. I was the one who wrote the reports he never bothered to read. To understand why Thomas's words cut so deep, You have to understand the dynamic of the family business. Our father, Frank, started the company with a single truck and a refusal to sleep more than 4 hours a night. He was old school. He believed in grit, grease, and handshakes. I was like him. From the time I was 12, I was in the office filing invoices. In college, I interned in the warehouse, learning how to drive a forklift and manage inventory software. I got my MBA not to get a fancy title, but because I wanted to understand the operational efficiencies that could save us pennies that added up to millions. Thomas was different. Thomas was the golden boy. He was the high school quarterback, the frat president, the guy who could charm the bartender into giving free drinks. He barely scraped through his business degree, but Dad hired him immediately as a sales associate. And to be fair, Thomas could sell. He could sell ice to a polar bear, provided the polar bear didn't ask about the delivery schedule or the melting point. Over the last 5 years, as Dad's health declined, though, Maz had effectively crowned himself the heir apparent. He leased a company car, a Porsche SUV, that cost more than the annual salary of our warehouse manager. He remodeled his office with Italian leather furniture while denying my request to upgrade the outdated logistics software. And then there was Stephanie. Stephanie had married Thomas 3 years ago. I had tried to like her. I really had. But Stephanie treated the company like her personal ATM. When she asked for a job, Thomas created brand aesthetics for her. What does she actually do? I had asked Thomas once, looking at an expense report for market research that was clearly a spa weekend in Napa. She elevates our image, Claire, Thomas had sneered. She makes us look premium. You wouldn't understand. You're too busy looking at spreadsheets to see the big picture. The big picture, apparently, involved Stephanie coming into the office at 11:00 a.m., drinking 3 espressos, criticizing the receptionist's outfit, and then leaving for a lunch meeting that lasted until 4:00 p.m. They were a power couple built on flash and debt, and they viewed me not as a partner, but as a utility. I was the plumbing, necessary to flush away their messes, but something that should stay hidden behind the walls. The morning of the emergency meeting, the atmosphere in the office was brittle. Rumors were flying. I arrived at 7:30 a.m., dressed in my sharpest navy suit. I went straight to my office, avoiding the break room. At 7:55 a.m., Thomas strolled in. He looked hungover. His eyes were puffy, and he smelled faintly of stale bourbon and mints. Stephanie was with him, wearing sunglasses indoors and holding a venti latte. "What is this about, Claire?" Thomas demanded, leaning into my doorway. "Why is the old man dragging us in here this early?" "I don't know, Thomas. He just said to be here." "If this is about the retreat budget, I swear to God," he rubbed his temples, "I don't have the bandwidth for a lecture today." "Maybe if you had approved the budget last week like you were supposed to, we wouldn't be stressed," I said, unable to help myself. Thomas narrowed his eyes. "Watch it. Remember what I said yesterday. You're on thin ice." "Thomas, leave her alone," Stephanie drawled, checking her reflection in my office window. "She's probably just cranky because she doesn't have a date for the weekend. Again." She smirked at me. "Maybe we can set you up with one of the new warehouse guys. They like the quiet types." I stared at them. The contempt was so casual, so practiced. They didn't see me as a threat because they didn't see me as a person. They saw me as furniture. "The meeting starts in 2 minutes," I said, standing up and grabbing my notebook. "We shouldn't keep Frank waiting." We walked to the conference room. The entire executive team was there. The mood was somber. At the head of the table sat Dad. He wasn't wearing his usual suit. He was wearing a cardigan and slacks. He looked smaller than I remembered, but his eyes were flinty and hard. Thomas breezed in, pulling out the chair to Dad's right. "Morning, Pop. Little early for the war room, isn't it? Stephanie and I have a lunch reservation at." "Sit down, Thomas," Frank said. His voice wasn't loud, but it snapped like a whip. Thomas froze. He blinked, then sat down slowly. Stephanie took the seat next to him, lowering her sunglasses to peer at Dad. "I called you all here," Frank began, looking around the table, "because I have made a decision regarding the future of this company. Effective immediately." Thomas leaned back, a smug smile returning to his face. He shot a glance at the CFO, then at me, a look that said, "Here it comes, the coronation." "I am retiring," Frank said. "Today is my last day as CEO." "Well, Dad, you deserve it," Thomas said, already shifting into his magnanimous leader persona. "You've built a hell of a ship, and don't worry, I'm ready to steer it. I've got some big ideas for." "I'm sure you do," Frank interrupted, "but you won't be steering it." The room went dead silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Thomas's smile faltered. What do you mean?" Frank turned his head slowly and looked directly at me. "I am stepping down," Frank said clearly. "And I am naming Claire as the new CEO, effective immediately. She has full controlling interest and executive power." The silence stretched for one heartbeat, 2, 3. Then Thomas laughed. It was a sharp, barking sound. "Good one, Pop, seriously. Is this a lesson on humility? Because Claire—" He pointed a finger at me without looking at me. "Claire can't order a pizza without a spreadsheet. She's a distinct number 2. Everyone knows that." "I'm not joking, Thomas," Frank said, sliding a thick legal document across the table toward me. Thomas stood up, his chair screeching against the floor. "Are you insane? She's a mute. She has zero charisma. I am the face of this company. I bring in the clients." "You bring in the dinner bills," Frank shot back, his voice rising. "I've been watching the logs, Thomas. I've been reading the reports Claire writes and you sign. I know who renegotiated the shipping contracts. I know who saved the Memphis account when you forgot the deadline because you were in Vegas." Frank pointed a trembling finger at me. "She saved it. She fixed your mess. And she did it without asking for credit." "She's a secretary with a fancy title?" Stephanie shouted, standing up to join her husband. "This is ridiculous. Frank, you can't be serious. Thomas is your son." "And Claire is my daughter," Frank said softly. "And she is the only one in this room who actually knows how to run this business." He looked at me. "It's yours, Claire, all of it." I looked at the document. CEO. The letters seemed to vibrate on the page. I looked up at Thomas. His face was a mask of purple rage. "If you do this," Thomas hissed, leaning over the table, "I walk. You hear me? I walk, and I take the sales team with me. The company collapses in a month without me." He looked at me, his eyes wild. "Refuse it, Claire. Tell him you can't do it. Tell him you know your place." I looked at my brother. I thought about the meeting yesterday. I thought about the years of "you're too quiet, you're boring, you're lucky I keep you." I stood up, I didn't shake. My voice didn't tremble. "I accept the position, Dad," I said. Thomas looked like I had slapped him. "And Thomas," I said, turning to him. "What?" he spat. "You don't have to worry about walking out," I said calmly, "because you're fired." The silence in the conference room following my declaration was absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually follows a gunshot. Thomas stood there, his mouth slightly open, his face flushing a deep, mottled red. He looked at Frank, waiting for the punchline, waiting for our father to slap the table and say, "Gotcha, just a drill to test your loyalty." But Frank didn't move. He sat with his hands folded over his cane, watching Thomas with a gaze that was equal parts disappointment and resolve. "You can't fire me," Thomas whispered, his voice cracking. It was the first time I had ever heard him sound unsure. I'm the vice president of sales, I'm family." "I'm the CEO," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it didn't waver. I felt a strange sensation in my chest, the cold, hard armor of authority locking into place. "And as of 2 minutes ago, you are trespassing." "You little," Thomas lunged forward. Frank's cane slammed against the floor. "Thomas, sit down or get out." Thomas recoiled. He looked at Stephanie, who was frantically typing on her phone, likely texting her friends or a lawyer. "This is illegal," Stephanie announced, looking up with wide, indignant eyes. You can't just fire us without cause. We have contracts. We have rights. We'll sue this place into the ground. I anticipated that, I said. I reached into my bag. The sensible leather tote Thomas had mocked last Christmas for being ugly and pulled out a second folder. I have prepared severance packages. They are contingent on you signing a standard NDA and a non-compete clause. It's generous. 3 months' pay. 3 months, Thomas laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. I built this department. I am worth millions. You spent millions, I corrected. Now please, security is waiting outside. I hadn't actually called security yet, but I bluffed. It worked. Thomas grabbed his jacket, knocking his chair over in the process. You'll regret this, he spat, pointing a finger in my face. You think you can run this place. The sharks are going to eat you alive, Claire. You're a mouse. You've always been a mouse. Go home, Thomas, I said quietly. He stormed out, Stephanie trailing behind him, her heels clicking angrily on the hardwood. When the door slammed shut, the vibration rattled the water glasses on the table. I looked at Frank. He looked older than he had 10 minutes ago. He reached out and covered my hand with his. His skin was paper-thin and cold. You did good, he rasped. Hardest thing you'll ever have to do, but you did good. Why didn't you tell me, Dad? I asked, my adrenaline fading into exhaustion. Because if I told you, you would have tried to talk me out of it, he smiled weakly. You would have tried to fix him. You can't fix him, Claire. I tried for 30 years. After Frank left to go home and rest, I didn't celebrate. I didn't pop champagne. I went to my new office, Dad's office, and sat in the chair. It was too big for me. The leather smelled like Dad's aftershave and old paper. I needed to secure the perimeter. Thomas was right about one thing. He had allies. The sales team was loyal to him because he let them get away with murder on their expense accounts. I logged into the administrative server. I had full clearance now. No more access denied screens. No more need VP app. Roval pop-ups. I started digging. I wasn't looking for a smoking gun initially. I was just trying to figure out how much damage he could do if he started poaching clients. I pulled the client acquisition costs. I pulled the travel budgets. Then I saw it. It was a recurring payment to a vendor listed as Global Strategy Partners. It was coded under Consulting Brand Development. I frowned. I knew every vendor in our supply chain. I knew the guys who sold us cardboard boxes, and I knew the consultants who handled our tax audits. I had never heard of Global Strategy Partners. I clicked on the invoice history. $5,000 a month, then $7,500. Last month, it was $12,000. I pulled the actual invoices. They were amateurish, clearly made in a basic word processor. No tax ID listed on the header. No itemized breakdown of services, just retainer for strategic oversight. I ran the address listed on the invoice. It wasn't a business park. It wasn't an office building downtown. It was a P.O. box in a strip mall 3 towns over. A strip mall that, if I recalled correctly, was right next to the yoga studio Stephanie went to every Tuesday and Thursday. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. This wasn't just incompetence. This wasn't just laziness or bad management. I opened the State Business Registry database, a tool I used often to vet new suppliers. I searched for Global Strategy Partners. The registered agent wasn't Thomas. It was Stephanie's maiden name. I sat back, the air leaving my lungs. They were siphoning money. They were stealing from the company, from Dad, from us, and funneling it into a shell company to pay for. What? Her purses? His car lease. I felt a wave of nausea, followed immediately by a cold, sharp anger. Thomas had stood in that boardroom yesterday and called me boring. He had mocked my book reports. He had mocked my obsession with data. He had forgotten that the data tells a story, and he had just handed me the pen. I didn't call a lawyer yet. I needed more. If I was going to bury him, I needed to make sure he couldn't claw his way back out. I needed to see just how deep the rot went. 3 days later, the lawsuit arrived. It was delivered by a courier, a thick envelope that landed on my desk with a heavy thud. Thomas was suing for wrongful termination, defamation, and audaciously, emotional distress. He was demanding a severance package of $2 million and immediate reinstatement of his benefits. Attached to the lawsuit was a letter from his attorney, a man named Richard Sterling. I knew the name. Sterling was a bulldog who specialized in high-conflict divorces and corporate shakedowns. "He wants a meeting," my assistant, Sarah, said. She looked terrified. She had been Thomas's assistant before, and the transition had been rough for her. "Mr. Sterling says if we don't meet by Friday, they'll file an injunction to freeze company assets." "Let them come," I said, not looking up from my screen. "Set the meeting for tomorrow, 10:00 a.m. "Should I call our general counsel?" "No," I said. "I'll handle this myself." Sarah looked at me like I was suicidal. "Claire, Ms. Reynolds, Sterling is aggressive." "So am I, Sarah," I said. "I just do it quietly." The next morning, Thomas walked into the conference room like he owned it. He was wearing a new suit, navy blue, sharp. Sterling was with him, a man with silver hair and a smile that looked like a bear trap. "Claire," Thomas said, nodding as he sat down. He didn't look at me, he looked through me. "We can make this quick. Sign the check, issue a public apology stating that my termination was an administrative error, and we'll drop the suit." "Good morning to you too, Thomas," I said. I was alone on my side of the table. No lawyers, no backup, just me and a single manila folder. Sterling cleared his throat. "Ms. Reynolds, my client has a very strong case. Your father's decision was clearly influenced by cognitive decline. We have medical experts ready to testify that Frank Reynolds was not in a sound state of mind when he handed the company over to an unqualified successor." "Unqualified," I repeated. "You're an operations director, Claire," Thomas sneered. "You count boxes, you don't run empires. The staff is already revolting. Sales are down." "Sales are down because you haven't been here to approve the discounts you promised clients without authorization," I said calmly. "We are not here to debate performance," Sterling interrupted. "We are here to discuss the settlement. $2 million, or we go to court, and we expose the nepotism and the chaotic management of this family business to every trade journal in the country." I opened my folder. "I have a counteroffer," I said. Thomas rolled his eyes. "Oh, here we go. What, you're going to offer me 6 months' pay? Save your breath." "My counteroffer," I said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the table, "is that you drop this lawsuit, you resign from the board permanently, and you repay the $142,000 you stole over the last 18 months. The room went silent. Thomas froze. His hand, which had been reaching for a water bottle, stopped in midair. Sterling frowned. He picked up the paper. It was a visualization I had created. A flow chart showing company funds moving to global strategy partners and then immediately transferring to a private account held by Stephanie. "What is this?" Sterling asked, his voice losing some of its theatrical bluster. "That," I said, pointing to the paper, "is a record of payments to a shell company registered to Stephanie. It bills us for consulting, yet there are no deliverables, no contracts, and no emails. Interestingly, the timestamps of the transfers match perfectly with credit card payments for a lease on a Range Rover and a membership at the Oaks Country Club." I looked at Thomas. His face had drained of color. He looked like a child caught holding the matches. That's a legitimate vendor," Thomas stammered. "Stephanie, she consults. She gives advice on Vibes." "Vibes?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Is Vibes a tax-deductible service, Thomas?" "She works hard," Thomas shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "She helps me brainstorm. We talk about work at dinner. That's consulting." "It's embezzlement," I said coldly. "And since you approved the invoices, it's fraud. Piercing the corporate veil is remarkably easy when the consultant uses the company funds to pay for her husband's golf fees." Sterling looked at the document, then at his client. He closed his own file. The bulldog had realized the meat was poisoned. Thomas, Sterling said, his voice low and dangerous. Did you authorize these payments? It's not what it looks like, Thomas pleaded, turning to his lawyer. Claire is twisting the numbers. She's always doing this. She's obsessed with spreadsheets. I'm obsessed with the truth, I said. Mr. Sterling, if you proceed with this lawsuit, I will file a countersuit for corporate theft and fraud. I will hand this file to the district attorney, and I will make sure Stephanie is named as a co-conspirator. Thomas stood up, his chair tipping over backward. You wouldn't, she's family, I'm your brother. You ceased to be my brother the moment you looked me in the eye and told me I was worthless while you were stealing from our father, I said. My voice was shaking now, not from fear, but from the sheer tragedy of it. You stole from the man who built this life for you. I took what I was owed, Thomas screamed. I put up with his lectures, I put up with you, I deserve that money. We're done here, I said. You have 24 hours to withdraw the suit, or I call the police. I thought the threat of jail time would stop him. I underestimated his desperation. Thomas withdrew the lawsuit, but he didn't go quietly. He went scorched earth. 2 days after the confrontation, I received a call from Dave, one of our senior sales reps. Dave had been one of Thomas's boys, always laughing at his jokes, always going out for drinks. I expected him to quit. Claire, Dave said. He sounded hushed, like he was hiding in a closet. You need to lock down the CRM. Now. What's happening, Dave? Thomas is calling the client list. He's telling them the company is under federal investigation. He's telling them we're filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy next week. He's trying to flip them to a competitor, Logistics One. Logistics One was our biggest rival. If Thomas was feeding them our clients, he was likely trying to buy himself a job there with our book of business as his dowry. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because he called me, Dave said. He wants me to download the full customer database and email it to his personal account. He offered me 10 grand. Did you do it? No, Dave said. Look, Claire, I know I joked around with him. I know I wasn't respectful to you in meetings, but I have a mortgage, I have 2 kids. Thomas is burning the house down, and I don't want to be inside when it collapses. I know you're the one who actually keeps the shipments moving. Thank you, Dave, I said, feeling a lump form in my throat. I won't forget this. I hung up and immediately called it. Revoke all remote access for the sales team. Mandatory password resets, now. Then I called the Memphis client, our biggest account, the one I had saved last year. The contact, a gruff logistics manager named Bill, answered on the first ring. Claire, Bill said, I was just about to call you. I just got a very disturbing email from your brother. Bill, whatever he said. He says you're liquidating, Bill said. He says I need to pull my freight by Friday or it'll be seized by creditors. Claire, I have $4 million of inventory in your warehouses. If this is true, I need trucks there in an hour. It's a lie, Bill, I said, forcing my voice to be steady, projecting a calm I didn't feel. Thomas has been terminated for cause. There is no bankruptcy. There are no creditors. Our liquidity is the highest it has been in 5 years. I can send you our bank letters of good standing right now. He sent me a news article, Bill said, about an investigation. He sent you a fake, I said. Bill, think about the last 5 years. Who handled your Christmas rush when the ice storm hit? Who routed your drivers around the bridge collapse in Baltimore? You did, Bill said softly. I am the CEO now, I said. The person who solved your problems is now the person running the company. You aren't losing a partner, Bill. You're losing the dead weight that slowed us down. There was a long pause. I held my breath. Send me the bank letter, Bill said finally. And Claire, change the locks. I saved the account, but I knew this wasn't over. Thomas wasn't just stealing money anymore. He was trying to kill the company. He was trying to destroy Dad's legacy just to spite me. I needed to stop playing defense. I needed to end this. I called the forensic accountant I had hired the day after the audit began. How much more do you have? It's worse than the consulting fees, Claire, the accountant said. I found a pattern in the shipping manifests. Thomas was authorizing expedited shipping surcharges on almost every major contract, but the shipments were going standard ground. Where was the difference going? He set up a third-party billing agent. The clients paid the surcharge to the agent paid us the standard rate, and the difference, about 20%, stayed with the agent. And the agent? A shell company in Delaware. Beneficiary is Thomas Reynolds. How much? I asked. Over 4 years, nearly $400,000. This was it. The consulting fees were petty theft. This was grand larceny. This was federal wire fraud. I looked at the stack of evidence on my desk. It was heavy. It was the weight of my brother's life. If I used this, he wouldn't just be fired, he wouldn't just be broke, he would go to prison. I thought about the little boy who used to hold my hand when we crossed the street. I thought about the teenager who taught me how to drive. Then I thought about the man who told me I was lucky to be employed. I thought about the man who was currently calling my clients, trying to destroy the livelihoods of the 50 families who worked for us, just to soothe his bruised ego. He was like a rabid animal. He was in pain, yes, but he was dangerous. And you don't reason with a rabid animal, you put it down. I picked up the phone. Dave, it's Claire. I need you to write a sworn affidavit about the request Thomas made for the database. And then I need you to come to a meeting tomorrow. We're going to have a little family reunion. The settlement meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon. I had set the stage with the precision of a theater director. I chose the small conference room, the one without windows, the one where the air conditioning always hummed a little too loudly. It was claustrophobic. It was a pressure cooker. I told Sarah, my assistant, to leave a pitcher of water on the table, but no glasses. It was a petty detail, I admit, but I wanted them uncomfortable. I wanted them thirsty. At 1:55 p.m., Frank arrived. Dad looked older than he ever had, leaning heavily on his cane, his face pale and drawn. He didn't want to be here. He had asked me the night before if there was any other way. There isn't, Dad, I had told him gently. He's not just hurting me anymore. He's hurting the people who trust us. If we don't stop him, he'll take the whole family down with him. So now Frank sat in the corner chair, in the shadows, silent and grim. At 2:00 p.m., Thomas and Stephanie swept in. Their lawyer, Sterling, followed, looking significantly less confident than he had earlier in the week. He had likely done his own digging and found the cracks in Thomas's story, but he was still on the retainer, so he was still here. Thomas, however, was radiant. He practically bounced into the room. He saw me sitting at the head of the table, Dad's seat, and smirked. He didn't notice Dad in the corner immediately. Well, well, Thomas said, throwing his expensive leather briefcase onto the table. I knew you'd come around, Claire. I told Stephanie. She doesn't have the stomach for a fight. Did I say that, babe? You did, Stephanie chirped. She was wearing a new designer dress, likely bought on credit she expected the settlement to cover. It's really for the best, Claire. You were clearly overwhelmed. Sit down, I said. My voice was low, flat, devoid of emotion. Thomas chuckled, pulling out a chair. So, what's the offer? We're sticking to the $2 million plus a formal apology and, let's say, a consulting role for me. I'll be generous. I'll come back as a freelancer. $500 an hour. There is no offer, Thomas, I said. Sterling froze halfway to his seat. Ms. Reynolds, if there is no offer, why are we here? My client is prepared to file the injunction regarding the client list this afternoon. I invited you here, I said, opening the heavy black binder in front of me, because I wanted to give you one chance to see the evidence before I hand it to the FBI. I wanted to give you the courtesy of a head start. Thomas laughed. It was a loud, forced sound. The FBI? Oh my God, you're so dramatic. Did you watch a movie last night, Claire? What evidence? The shipping surcharges, I said. The laughter died instantly. It was as if I had reached across the table and cut his vocal cords. Thomas's mouth hung open. His eyes darted to Sterling, then to Stephanie, then back to me. "I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, but his voice was thin, reedy. "I think you do," I continued, turning a page in the binder. "Since 2019, you have personally authorized priority expedited surcharges on 42 major accounts. These clients paid a 20% premium for 24-hour delivery." I looked up, locking eyes with him. But the shipments were sent ground freight, standard delivery. The clients never knew because our logistics team is so efficient, thanks to me, that we often deliver early anyway. But the money? The extra 20%. I slid a bank statement across the table. It wasn't the company account. It was the account for Apex Logistics Solutions, a Delaware LLC. "It went here," I said, "and from here, it went to your personal brokerage account. $392,000. Sterling picked up the paper. His hands were shaking slightly. He read the numbers, then looked at his client with a mix of horror and professional disgust. "Thomas," Sterling said, his voice quiet, "is this accurate?" It's a misunderstanding," Thomas shouted, sweat beading on his forehead. That was a commission structure. Dad promised me commissions. I was just streamlining the process." "I never promised you that." The voice came from the corner. Thomas spun around. He hadn't seen Dad. Frank slowly stood up, stepping out of the shadows. He looked at his son not with anger, but with a profound, shattering heartbreak. "Dad," Thomas whispered. "Dad, wait. She's lying. She's manipulating the books. You know how she is with numbers. She can make them say anything." "She showed me the signatures, Thomas," Frank said, walking slowly to the table. He sounded tired. "I recognized your handwriting. I recognized the routing numbers." Frank placed a hand on the back of my chair. "I built this company on a promise. A handshake means something. A contract means something. You didn't just steal money, son. You stole our word. You sold our integrity for what?" Frank gestured vaguely at Stephanie, at Thomas's suit, at the flashy watch on his wrist. "For things, for toys." "I did it for us," Thomas screamed, slamming his fist on the table. The veneer of the golden boy finally cracked, revealing the terrified, entitled child underneath. "I was the one bringing in the business. I was the one shaking hands. I deserved more than a salary. I was the prince, Dad. I was supposed to be the king." "You were never the king," I said softly. "You were the jester, and everyone knew it but you." "Shut up," Thomas lunged toward me, his face twisted in rage. Sterling grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "Sit down, you idiot. Do not add assault to wire fraud." Stephanie, who had been staring at the bank statements, suddenly stood up. She looked at the total amount, nearly $400,000, and then at the word FBI. "I didn't know," she announced. Her voice was shrill. Thomas looked at her. "What?" "I didn't know," Stephanie repeated, looking at me, then at Dad. "I had no idea he was doing this. He told me it was bonuses. He told me the company was paying for the car. I am a victim here." Thomas looked like he had been punched in the gut. "What are you doing?" "I'm not going to jail for you, Thomas," she shrieked. She grabbed her purse. "I have a reputation. I am a brand consultant. I can't be associated with embezzlement." "You spent the money," Thomas yelled, pointing at her. "The Napa trip, the remodel, the jewelry, you spent every dime." "I spent what my husband gave me," she yelled back. She looked at me. "Claire, I'll testify. If you need a witness, I'll testify. I want immunity." "Get out," I said. "I'm serious, Get out." Stephanie looked at the faces in the room, realized she had no allies left, and fled. The door didn't slam this time. She slipped out like a thief in the night. Thomas was alone. His lawyer was packing up his briefcase. His wife had abandoned him. His father was looking at him like he was a stranger. "Mr. Sterling," I said, "the police are waiting in the lobby. I assumed you would want to escort your CL. Eat down so he doesn't cause a scene." Sterling nodded. He looked at Thomas. "We're leaving. Now, do not say another word." Thomas looked at Dad. Tears were streaming down his face now, angry, self-pitying tears. "Dad, you're going to let them arrest me? Dad, I'm your son." Frank closed his eyes. He took a deep, shuddering breath. "I have a daughter," Frank said softly, "and she is the CEO of this company. It is her decision." Thomas looked at me. For the first time in his life, he didn't look down on me. He looked up. He saw the quiet sister, the boring sister, the one who worked in the shadows. And he saw that the shadows were where the real power lived. "Claire," he begged, "please." "You're way too loud, Thomas," I said. "The company needs some quiet." I pointed to the door. Sterling grabbed Thomas by the shoulder and led him out. I heard Thomas sobbing as they walked down the hallway. When the door closed, the silence returned. But this time it wasn't heavy. It was clean. The fallout was swift, brutal, and public. Thomas was indicted on 6 counts of wire fraud and 2 counts of grand larceny. Because the amounts were significant and the evidence was irrefutable, thanks to my obsession with documentation, his lawyer advised him to plead guilty to avoid a trial that would have aired every dirty laundry basket the family owned. He was sentenced to 36 months in a minimum security federal facility, followed by 5 years of probation. He was ordered to pay full restitution. Since he had no money left, Stephanie had liquidated their joint accounts and filed for divorce the day after the confrontation. He had to sell everything. The Porsche, the house, the watches, it all went to the auction block. I didn't attend the sentencing. I didn't need to see him in an orange jumpsuit to know he was gone. I had already said my goodbye in that conference room. The company, surprisingly, didn't collapse. In fact, it flourished. Once I purged the consultants and the ghost vendors, our overhead dropped by 18%. I used that money to give the warehouse team a raise, the first real raise they had seen in 4 years. I upgraded the logistics software. I hired Dave as the new sales director, on the condition that he actually worked instead of just taking clients to golf. Dave turned out to be excellent. Without Thomas forcing him to be a bro, he was a thoughtful, strategic leader. He respected me. He didn't interrupt me in meetings. 3 months after Thomas went away, I was sitting in my office, Dad's office, though I had finally replaced the leather chair with an ergonomic one that actually fit me, when Frank knocked on the door. He came in slowly. He was looking better. The stress of the secret, the burden of covering for Thomas's incompetence, had lifted from his shoulders. He was playing cards with his friends again. He was sleeping. "Got a minute for an old man?" he asked. "Always, Dad." He sat down and looked around the room. It was different now. I had taken down the hunting trophies and put up whiteboards. The desk was covered in organized stacks of paper, but there was a sense of motion, of progress. "I got a letter from him," Frank said. He didn't need to say who. "What did it say?" "He's blaming the lawyer, blaming Stephanie, blaming the judge," Frank sighed. "He still doesn't get it. He thinks the world did this to him." "Some people never learn, Dad. They just find new people to blame." Frank nodded. He looked down at his hands. "I owe you an apology, Claire." "You don't." "I do," he insisted. "I saw what he was. I saw it years ago, but I didn't want to admit that my son was broken, so I let him play pretend. And I let him treat you like a servant because I knew you were strong enough to take it. That was wrong. I used your strength against you." I got up and walked around the desk. I sat on the edge of it, next to him. "You gave me the company, Dad. You trusted me when it mattered." "I should have done it 5 years ago," he said, looking up at me. His eyes were wet. "You were always the leader, Claire. I was just too deaf to hear you because you didn't shout." I took his hand. "I'm not shouting now, Dad, but everyone is listening." He squeezed my hand. "Yeah, they are." We sat there for a while in the quiet office, the hum of the warehouse below us, the sound of trucks loading, of forklifts moving, of a business running like a well-oiled machine. It was the sound of my life's work. Thomas was right about one thing: I was quiet. But he was wrong about what that meant. He thought quiet meant weak. He thought quiet meant passive. He didn't realize that the eye of the hurricane is quiet, too. And that's the only place where you can see clearly enough to survive the storm. I walked over to the window and looked out at the parking lot. I saw my car, still the same modest sedan. I saw the employees walking to their cars, laughing, talking. The fear was gone fr. The building. The toxicity had been flushed out. My phone buzzed. It was an email from the Memphis client. Just wanted to say thanks, Claire. Best quarter we've ever had. You run a tight ship. I smiled. I didn't need the applause. I didn't need the flashy car or the brand aesthetics. I had the work. I had the respect. And for the first time in my life, I had the peace of knowing that I wasn't just keeping the seat warm for someone else. I was the CEO, and I had plenty of work to do.